Well, Thursday night greetings to everyone. Thanks for joining me on this Thursday night. No, we are not going to have Bible study, but I felt very impressed with the Lord to share something that happened in June of 2010. And it comes from my heart to you tonight. And I want to, if I don't get anything else across tonight, I want you I want to get this across to you that miracles are to be shared. And please don't give up on God. I don't know where you're at tonight. I don't know what you're going through. I have some very dear friends, some very close friends that are spending their evening once again in a hospital room. And my heart goes out to each one of them. And I want to encourage you tonight. And I want to start with the scripture. It's not going to be a Bible study. What I'm going to do is I want to read to you a story, an event that I wrote, and I wrote this several months after the event, since the event happened, and so that in and of itself was God for my memory to serve me as well as it did to write about the event. But can I just read Isaiah 55? You know the verse. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. It starts at verse 8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways my ways. It is a declaration of Adonai. For as the heavens are higher than earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. If you're watching me tonight, I want you to get this. This may be something that you can share with others. I hope that you do. I hope that you will share it to somebody that needs an encouraging word. And with that, I'm just going to go ahead and I want to just show you, this is about Bill Chilcote. And Bill Chilcote was the founder of the Ambassadors. I had the privilege of singing with the Ambassadors for years. And this is, in fact, us singing here. This is at the Assembly in Broken Arrow. And you can see him up in the right-hand corner of the screen. That was after the event that I'm going to share with you that I penned back in 2010. And there he is in the bottom right corner. This is the last recording that we did at Drapp Studio. And there you can see at the bottom right is Reese. Reese has already gone on to heaven. He's waiting for you and waiting for me. And Louis Drapp right here, and there's Bill, of course, and yours truly. And this is I want to give you this picture right up front, and then I'm going to read what I wrote. This is my friend Bill, and this is the scene I walked into after supposed to have met him for a singing event that he never made. But this is Bill after this event. And so again, this is what I want to share with you, is that miracles are to be shared, and to please don't give up on God. So let me begin. It was June 21, 2010, that the doctors told my family that I might not make it out of my unexpected and critical hospitalization following a heat stroke, kidney failure, and known type 2 diabetes. I'm so thankful for the answered prayers of hundreds, possibly more, and it was Bill, a lot more, who petitioned our Lord on my behalf for my recovery. I give him praise every opportunity possible and share the good news with everyone who will listen. Thank you for your prayers. And that ends the quote for Bill Chilcote. Now starts my part, and I hope you'll listen to this. I start out writing, a copy of the 4 instant messaging notes between Roger and Bill hit my inbox on November 10th of 2009. As lead singer for the Ambassadors, I remembered meeting Roger Kinsey at Lost Creek United Methodist Church. Our group has shared the gospel and song on several occasions at their church. Located south of Stillwater and beyond Perkins, Oklahoma, you'll find a very active church. Bill Chilcote is a longtime friend and founder of the Ambassadors. His email to me simply mentioned a wonderful opportunity and asked for prayer and consideration from myself and at that time Vicky McQuistion, the third member of the group. Nowhere in the message was there any mention of a mission trip to Alaska, but such is Bill's style of methodical patience. In over 40 years of singing across the country, the ambassadors have never been given such a wonderful opportunity to be a part of a 10-day mission trip. The team, made up mostly of UMC members at Lost Creek and Edmond and Oklahoma City, was prepared to share their building talents as well as teach on the 5 principles of a fruitful congregation. And then there was the 3 of us. There was also my wife, Lori, and our role was to provide music, the ambassadors, in the evenings at the Soldotna United Methodist Church. Tape the journey, help in the kitchen, teach the children. That's Lori's lifelong career or calling, and any other areas that we might be needed. Emails, instant messaging, fundraisers, phone calls, team meetings, fundraisers, orientation, practices, fundraisers. I may have already mentioned that before. And prayer went by quickly. And then June 19th, 2010 was suddenly here. Saturday morning, the moment we had all been waiting on, except maybe for those not going on the trip, was interrupted by a normal ring, 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 which is a little annoying. It was an angry ring, which is the title that I had, but hilarious and assigned exclusively to Bill Chilcote on my BlackBerry phone. Many of you don't even maybe know what those are. Anticipating the typical covering of last-minute details, I answered the call with excitement. The voice on the other end of the line sounded vaguely familiar. It was Bill. He gave me a quick synopsis on how sick he was, how dry his mouth was, and that regrettably he did not think there was any way he could make the flight out that morning. Lori and I would be leaving for the airport to join the rest of the team who was driving in from Stillwater to Tulsa in now less than 30 minutes. The call concluded with plans for Bill to be driven by his cousin Joe Brown to the airport. Bill would then bring the laptop holding our entire playlist of tracks, along with the microphones, cables, etc., and join us later in the trip. We did not realize that at the time neither the microphones, packed in another case left at Bill's home in Mounds, nor Bill would make that trip to Alaska, at least not this year. Lori and I continued as planned, arrived at Tulsa International Airport, and was greeted by the rest of the team already gathered in the check-in area. A short time later, an unknown telephone number came up on my cell. Joe Brown introduced himself to me as Billy's cousin and that there would be a delay in bringing the laptop to us. Joe was taking Billy to ER first. Little did we know how the relationship between that unknown telephone number at the time and Joe Brown would develop over the next 2 weeks and beyond. So here was this Alaska team, 2010, of 20 minus 1, facing individual testing of faith that would only increase as the journey continued. For 19 of us, it would be a battle of emotions that are suddenly being revived right now as I share this with you. And I continue to read. For one, it would be a fight for life. Our group departed Tulsa and landed in Dallas as scheduled. Joe Brown called to report that Bill, obviously sicker than anyone realized, had been admitted to the hospital and was in ICU. His body was dehydrated. His kidneys were being affected. There was nothing more to report for now. Joe and I agreed to touch base again as soon as additional information was available. The 3-hour time difference between Alaska and Oklahoma did eventually play a somewhat challenging role in the sequence of updating information. This factored in on both the sending and receiving end of the progress updates. The concern became quickly evident on faces throughout the team as Bill's condition was relayed. You could see lips start to move as silent individual prayers began to be offered. Others began texting or calling family and friends to report the news. Heaven was starting to receive a blend of voices praying for a quick recovery as a band of faith began to form across the region, still counting on a simple simple delay for our friend to rejoin the team in Alaska, we boarded the flight for Anchorage. The nonstop flight from DFW to Anchorage was a long 6 hours and approximately 40 minutes. Between the pages of another Lee Child and Jack Reacher mystery novel reflecting over the past week of activities leading up to the trip gave no overpowering evidence to support my friend being in ICU versus in a seat beside me. At a relatively young age of 64, with an alien-like ability to recall telephone numbers, names, dates, and other things permanently dislodged from most of the rest of the people like myself, Bill was in good health. A lean, active mind and body that keeps pace with most has no business being in ICU, as far as I could see. A week ago, Bill was routinely helping with the cattle chores. That was nothing new. It was hot that weekend. In Oklahoma, that's also routine for this time of the year. June, remember, 2010. The mound's home place is filtered with pecan trees and native hardwoods. Shade is available even by the corral where activities the previous weekend had taken place. The water can, previously positioned or properly positioned on top of a post at the pen, was on site and in use. It was not new, but surely the broken handle had little effect on the cool water inside. Bill, along with the others, drank from the can, and he had remarked how the handle needed to be fixed. Joe remembered the remark and mentioned it to me. The novel was an excellent read for me, back to the Jack Reacher for me, but the reflection part was not turning up anything significant enough to land my friend in his ICU. The flight seemed way longer, with the ability to call the unknown number yet to be lodged in my contacts under Joe Brown. Cousin to Bill is the way I labeled it. So there's no way to get your mind to be able to associate the sun shining and it being 10 p.m. local time, at least not if you're from Oklahoma. Remember, I'm writing this from the Anchorage, Alaska trip. It was 1 a.m. in Oklahoma and dark at about the same time Alaska Team 2010 was loading up in the two 12-passenger vans for what would become a scenic route to the local Golden Corral. Note, if you would like more details on how a 5-mile trip from the airport location took approximately 3 times longer than it should have, just ask me. I'd be glad to share with you. In fact, most any of the team members that were present, save the driver of the white van, could give you a nice rendition of that jaunt. Multiple inquiries would most likely provide a universal, I'm using you hard on purpose, a universal perspective. Actually, the scenic experience from the airport to the buffet came as a much-needed release of mixed emotions, because laughter is a good medicine, Proverbs 17:22 says, and a cheerful heart, that's what it says, good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. So back to our familiar seats in either the white or gray vans, and off we went in a southerly direction toward Kenai Peninsula. We had all been up between 20 and 24 hours straight. We were growing weary. Mile 101 on Seward Highway and the Bird Ridge Motel with its giant bald eagle statue was a welcome sight for everyone. The back of the vans found immediate relief as the piles of luggage found their way into the respective owners' rooms for the night. The team devotional ended with a special prayer for Bill. It was 1 a.m. Alaska time, while light enough outside to read and mid-60s, but 3 a.m. in Oklahoma, hot and dark. By 7 a.m. local time, the gray and white vans were once again packed with 10 days of luggage for 19 people, split up as equally as the sizes and configurations would allow. Leaving the Bird Hotel behind, most of the team reclaimed their original seating positions and settled in for the 2-hour drive to Soldotna, home of the world record king salmon and the Soldotna United Methodist Church. On our first day in Soldotna, Alaska was packed tight with activity. If the two vans could talk, they would be able to describe this first day in the mission field without any difficulty, considering their firsthand experience thus far in the journey. Needless to say, Sunday, June 20, 2010, would provide an excellent representation of the remaining trip. Cousin Joe Brown phoned just prior to the end of service that evening, following orientation from host pastor Richard Wetzel and teaching from team member Buddy Moore. My hip vibrated, a quick exit from the evening service, a soft hello, this is Mike, and the voice on the other end of the unknown number replied with a weary voice, yeah, this is Joe. Searching for good news to share and good news to report back to the group, we hung up without nothing more to say. His call came about as late as he thought was reasonable based on the 3-hour time difference. The foyer kept me concealed just long enough to update my contact list. The unknown number was now assigned to Joe Brown, cousin to Bill Chilcote, filed under friends. The scheduled 7 a.m. start time would begin routine during the trip. The smell of bacon and eggs cooking permeated the Soldotna church as the team gathered for breakfast, morning devotion, and instructions. I repeated the same answer to the same questions individually to several team members and again to the group regarding Bill's condition or report just prior to the group prayer for the day. It was still too early to be hearing anything from our friends in Tulsa. While the prayer covered numerous areas like traveling mercies to the mission, productivity for all the week ahead, the prayer's focus was on healing for Bill. This would be our first day of work Monday, which was June 21st at the Friendship Mission in Kenai. 30 or so minute drive from Soldotna would allow time for daily rounding at St. John's Medical Center, room 819. Enough time had passed since Bill was admitted to the hospital to get some answers. Plus, we all were praying. Our family and friends back home were praying. We were on the mission field doing God's work. After all, the connections we were making in Alaska got to hear about Bill, this guy from Mounds, Oklahoma, who was in need of a miracle. People who knew us were praying. Plus, we thought he would be joining us eventually on this trip and all would be well. We had made plans, and this extreme interruption and detour was not part of the plan. Reasoning based on emotions will wear you out. I'm reading that, not, yeah. The text messages, emails, and Facebook notifications had already picked up volume shortly after arriving in Dallas and prior to Anchorage. There were still more questions than any of us had answers for, but we knew people were praying for Bill. Word of his hospitalization spread quickly as the team shared individually on their cell phones between their family and friends. Thank God, the last frontier had been found by enough satellite strength that gave the team cellular and internet access. By the time the vans pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Friendship Mission, I had received updates from both Joe Brown and Dalton Beck, a longtime friend and former member of the Ambassadors. Dalton gave an almost identical update on Bill's condition, as did Joe. Their description of our friend from Mounds was much worse than expected. His kidneys were in critical condition. His lungs were a major concern. He was unresponsive, swollen upper body, and on a respirator. Dialysis was next, and from their descriptions, the amount of equipment left little space in the room for anybody else. Dalton's phrase, "he's really bad," brought a huge lump in my throat, and we both decided to end the call. Bill's condition warranted keeping visiting traffic out of the equation, leaving those close by and those far away only to pray. And pray, we did. The latest report spawned an even higher volume of satellite activity between Tulsa, Alaska, and literally parts of the rest of the world. The day was winding down. Having completed what work could be done at the Friendship Mission prior to the evening classes back at Soldotna, we learned the sewer system had clogged, causing no small dilemma for the facility or our team. The two porta-johns, along with accommodations from the Baptist church across the street, brought immediate welcomed relief. Naturally, well, we knew without a doubt by then that we were really on a mission trip. The ambassadors, consisting of Vicky, myself, our new recruit, Lori, my wife of 31 years at the time, had opened with a song for the evening class. We had barely heard a recap of the previous night's lesson when the unwelcomed vibration on my hip caused a quick exit out of the sanctuary. Buddy was close to finishing the series for the night, and the ambassadors were supposed to be closing the session with another song. There was not much time left. The text message with clickable image attachment, that's the one that I showed, sent from a friend in Broken Arrow, came through at about the same time as the call from Sandra Barton hit. Her call went to voicemail as I continued letting the phone process, waiting for the attachment to finally open. It wasn't hard to guess what Sandra was calling about or the news that she had to give. Her cell phone number was still on my screen, so I quickly texted her back, asking if I could call her in a bit, knowing that our time to enter the stage and sing was very close. Her text reply was almost immediate. It read, "No, call now." So I called. Sandra informed me that Bill's condition had reached an even more critical place and that the next 24 hours would mean life or death. Well, the news was taken about as well as it was given, and the call ended with yet another incoming call. The screen displayed Joe Brown, Bill's cousin. Joe wearily repeated the unbelievable news. This all felt very much like a bad dream. Swallowing hard, very hard, and fighting back the tears, the phone was placed back in its cradle as I re-entered the sanctuary. The back of the church became my selected seating location, preventing me from being visible to Vicky, Lori, and the rest of the team. The brief pause was quickly halted as the ambassadors were called on to share the final song of the evening. Composure was a must. Patience and being able to share the devastating news was becoming accomplished some way, somehow, but it was not by me. Immediately following the service and towards the back of the sanctuary, Vicky, Lori, and I gathered in a small huddle. My cell phone still had the JPEG image of Bill in ICU. There's that pic that I showed. I could show it again on the screen. Composure became an even greater challenge, multiplied times 3. Our unsettling questions and heightened emotions gave ample time for the rest of the team to discover our spontaneous private meeting. Lost in the moment and without normal awareness of our surroundings, the small huddle began to grow. Now standing in and around the pews along the wall behind us were 17, 16 plus one pastor's soldiers. They were not in uniform that would distinguish them as such to the natural eye, but in the spiritual sense, they were warriors ready to stand in the gap. The gap for us at that moment was huge, but God was closing the gap for us and for Bill. One by one, the team began expressing their support for whatever decision was made. To stay and complete the mission or to arrange 3 return flights to Tulsa. The doctors had said the next 24 hours will determine whether he lives or dies. Kept rewinding, playing over and over. The doctors said, and then I would pause, and then it would rewind, and then it would play. The doctors said, pause, rewind, play. The sincere faces of the warriors around showed strength and encouragement. They said, "We're behind you all the way." Some of the lines from what has become our signature song, at the time the group was still singing, says this: "You've been praying and you're still praying. You've been asking and you're still wondering. Well, there's nothing too impossible that my God cannot do." End of quote. It was late. We would make that decision tomorrow. An immediate check to be sure my cell phone was charged and working revealed no messages, no missed calls, no voicemail, no emails, text messages, save the typical pharmacy spammers and their annoying counterparts. Delete all the prior items, deleting, getting a clear screen once again, and then breakfast in less than an hour. No angelic visits manifested through the night. A trumpet blast might have worked, but only if it were at least 2 octaves above middle C and as loud as a Ted Nugent concert. A call had already been made yesterday to have the flights scheduled from Alaska to Tulsa emailed to my phone. They were saved and ready to be retrieved if needed. No word. No decision. No packing either. It was still early. The group was learning by now that news from the hospital would probably come later. They asked anyway. Janet Bassler led devotional. You'll know it. Was appropriate as the team listened to her delivery on how God is mindful of us. With no news on Bill, prayer was given and the vans were once again loaded up for the short jaunt south to Kenai and the Friendship Mission. An Arctic entry needed to be completed, and it was already Tuesday, June the 22nd. Just prior to stopping for photos of a mama and baby moose grazing lazily just east of Arby's, the familiar vibration on my hip revealed the text, "No change." Before the message could be relayed to the others inside the white van, the phone rang. The same person who had just texted the "no change" message was now calling. Dalton said, "I just wanted to talk instead of this texting stuff." The bottom line and reason for the call was that according to Bill's nurse, he was holding his own. For the moment, that was welcome news. In fact, that short phrase was a prize of great value. It was shared with the others in the white van, those in the gray van, and repeated again to others throughout the day. Well, the 5th day of the mission trip was also the 5th day of the hospital stay. You start to get used to the environment, the activities, and settle in to enjoy things a little bit more, but not so in a hospital. I wanted to flesh out something from an earlier chapter 5 that had a good ending. While we weren't necessarily sharing our misfortune with everyone, the major sewer inconvenience at Soldotna had been repaired in a timely and miraculous way. It was no small expense, and God provided the means to cover over and above what those repairs cost. That was really, really good news. Some of you watching right now could use just that kind of news. The mission activities continued as planned for both the work in Kenai and Soldotna, Alaska. The cell phone towers and their associated base stations in Oklahoma City and Alaska were getting a break today. Thanks to Kay Welch and everyone connected, the prayer shawl, hand-delivered to Bill Prayershaw by Sharon from the Lost Creek Church, would have arrived by now. Knowing that any change would generate a call, we simply waited. Daily work in Kenai had ended and service began on Wednesday, June 23rd at Soldotna, but not before calls came from both Joe and Dalton. The connection was good as the update. Bill's blood pressure meds had been discharged. His oxygen sats were down to 60%, was 100% when he started. And the next stage would be to start bringing him out of the drug-induced coma once those stats reached 30%. Once again, our cell phones began inundating the atmosphere with our special transmission. This was good news, and we were going to share it. The evening service ended with one song. People request particular songs for various reasons. Often it reminds them of a special time, special place, special person. Sometimes a song is requested just because it's an old favorite or a new favorite. Although Vicki and I had never sung the song as a duet, which was Sweet Beulah Land, it hit the mark, at least for Roger. The request never made it to us that night, but we sang it anyway. We would find out later during devotional that Roger had wanted to hear that old favorite. He had told Nancy about it, but neither one of them told us. God just has a way of doing those things. The earlier calls from both Joe and Dalton had concluded with the best report we'd received yet. Bill's condition had changed from critical to stable. Like sideline cheerleaders, we were reassuring one another with the welcome news. Still, I was thankful that Vicky had the second verse of that song that night. Thursday and Friday of our final work days for the mission trip in Alaska were very productive. Bill's condition was fluctuating somewhat. But as another dear friend, Sandra Barton, reflects, I started by nagging at Bill several days before his departure time to leave for Alaska. I knew how badly he wanted to go and suspected that he was not being entirely truthful about how poorly he was feeling. I gave it my all on Thursday. This is still Sandra talking, not Thursday, by telling him he must not try to go on this trip. It'd be too dangerous. I felt he needed more medical care than he was willing to admit to. He assured me he was going, and that was that. Well, Joe called on Saturday to say that they were in the hospital starting to run tests and give Bill fluids. Ed and I waited until the next day, Sunday, to go to the hospital. This is still Joe talking. Bill's sitting up, visiting, and trying to eat some soup. He resembled a very ill toad with the shakes. They had pumped the fluids to him, and he was terribly swollen. With all kinds of tubes and machines in attendance, he was unable to get much soup down because of the shaking of his hands. As Ed and I walked back to the car, we discovered his condition and both felt that the signs were not encouraging and that our buddy was in real bad shape. The call from Cousin Joe the next day confirmed it. From that moment on, for the next 2 weeks, Bill was in a medically induced coma for the next 2 weeks, was completely unaware of all that was going on around him. That in itself was probably a blessing. Dialysis was started. He had a breathing tube inserted. His bed was constantly moving him to keep his lungs from being endangered. Daily reports from Cousin Joe were full of hope, but also the realism of the test results. Poor Joe had to be the recipient of my great ability to cry at the least provocation. Happy, sad, scared, it doesn't matter. I'm one of the most emotional people I know. He was a trooper, and he gave me a lot of comfort and security in knowing that he was always there. I have great admiration for him, says Sandra Barton. So continue on. The fluctuation in Bill's condition continued over the next 3 days, and on Tuesday, the report came back to us that weaning trials were starting again. He had actually started moving his legs, and his oxygen saturation was down close to 35%. This was about the time the mission team was headed to Anchorage for the red-eye flight back through Dallas and then into Tulsa. It is a very common speed limit across many of our roads. In CB radio terms, it has often been referred to as double nickels. My dad said that a lot. The natural number following 54 and preceding 56 would be my estimate of number of bags we were handling for the last time on this trip as we exited the baggage claim at Tulsa International Airport. It was June 30, and our group was home. Almost. Hugs abounded, indicated much stronger relationships than 12 days earlier, and the group gathered outside of the airport, curbside, to pray for Bill. While the rest of the team loaded the majority of the people and luggage for their westerly route home, Lori, Vicky, and I headed to 21st and Utica, room 819. My father and youngest son came in, our Pathfinder, to pick us up. Vicky and her father would meet us at the hospital. My last conversation before boarding the plane in Anchorage alerted Joe to our plans of going directly to the hospital after arriving in Tulsa. My dad and son Brett had already been to see Bill prior to our visit. We gathered around the bed, held his hand, spoke encouraging words, and managed a quick message on his feet, a massage rather, on his feet. I wrote this, can't read it. Prayed, and Joe, cousin to Bill, and our new comrade joined us. The weight of the reports was an undeniable reality as we tried again to grasp Bill's condition. Joe reminded us of how far Bill had already come, but somehow at the very moment, it didn't sound all that great. Our friend was, he was holding his own. And we could only do the same, hopefully, and pray. July 1st through the 4th is still pretty much a blur. There were many contributing factors that led me so easily to such a conclusion. The normal things left undone or needing to be caught up at home, at work, and elsewhere are always to be expected after being gone for any length of time, but there was more this time. Joe, Dalton, and other close friends had been hovering and tending to Bill, at least in a, hey, we're right here sort of way. Well, it was now my turn. But there was this constant feeling of not doing enough, of not being able to make Bill better, which was, after all, what these friends had been feeling all along. I now got to experience it for myself. It was the same feeling of helplessness being here as it was not being here. The false notion of being able to make things happen quicker that had danced in my head while in Alaska had suddenly buckled to its knees, literally. Prayer was still the answer. It was then. It is now. It will always continue to be. Prayer is the answer. With a tunnel to access the hospital from my office at the time to Bill and I spent together, and it helped. It helped me. The signs of improvement, including the tiny ones, are much clearer up close and personal. The emails, the tweets, the text message, and phone calls continued, but somehow being able to relay information seen with my own eyes just made things better. There was still hope, and everyone is always full of comfort, full of faith, and hanging tough for Bill. You're watching me tonight, and you've stayed here this long. Who are you hanging tough for? Well, keep hanging tough for them, my friends, and keep praying. Don't ever stop giving up on God. Let me continue, if you don't mind. I kept reminding Bill and myself that people were praying. He was improving and that he was going to be okay. I still remember spending hours with an Etch-a-Sketch in my lap as a youngster, drawing and figuring out how to get from one line to another without making an additional mark that didn't fit. It was a blast. Not so much for an adult, and especially when you are stuck in ICU. The keypad was not an Etch-a-Sketch, but similar in that you could press letters to make full words. The therapists were inching Bill along to start communicating and developing his motor skills. It was far from fun for him. When you look like someone ready to be launched into space for detailed work on some station or equipment next to the moon and you are on a short leash, everything's hard. Ram a tube down your throat, toss in large doses of medication, amnesia, etc. And then to put a child's toy in your lap to communicate just doesn't compute. Well, Bill preferred the writing tablet, of course, to scribble his thoughts. His vertical strokes were far better than the horizontal ones, and the frustration was fairly equal for him and anyone who happened to be in his room at the time trying to communicate. As Bill slowly climbed from the unconscious level to the confused but awakening level of the coma, movement and responses continued to increase. So did his writing skills. Scribbles began to form letters and eventually words, and sentences became legible. It seemed the frustration levels of communication were keeping pace with the awakening in a good way. Goodbye, Etch-a-Sketch, and hello, Big Chief Tablet. Well, a tracheotomy is usually done for one of three reasons. In Bill's case, the team of physicians determined that this surgical procedure was needed in order to get oxygen to his lungs. Joe and I discussed the risks. We didn't have much time to make a decision. Little did we know that in 12 to 18 hour time frame that we were consulting with family, friends, and other medical professionals. The primary physicians had also determined that they would proceed with or without our consent. They would chalk it up as a medical necessity and move forward. Well, obviously, we were concerned about Bill's voice. His vocal cords, singing and ministering meant everything to Bill. But then there is living. The doctors were informed to proceed, and we in turn were informed that we were only a few hours away from scheduling the surgery. Confirmation for us, relief for them. We were on the same page. The responses were mixed as I shared with my contact list that we were going to do a trach. The emotions were weighted much heavier towards the side of apprehension than those of enthusiasm, at least those I spoke with. I found myself repeating, "We want Bill more than we want his voice." And as our friend Sandra put it, this was a turning point for Bill. The improvement following that surgery was incredible. Little by little, the 4-hook top smorgasbord of IV stands went down to a 4-place setting, 1 pole, 4 bags, versus 4 poles, 16 bags. Bill's condition had gone from critical to seriously critical, then to stable and comfortable in 16 days. For a guy who's occupied the same residence for almost 54 years, moving to the other end of the 8th floor in the hospital was a really, really big deal. It was for all of us a big deal. Bill was moved on Monday, July 5th, to a regular, normal, non-NSA, my blog, and I can make up words if I want to, room with non-NASA's, non-NASA room with a window view of West Tulsa. His previous room also had a window, but nobody cared. This was different. The visitor's gate, invisible but honored with respect by his friends, sounded a happy tune as more friends came by for brief visits. The dietary staff came by to allow menu selections for the next meals. The straggly facial hair was shaven, and there was renewed faith that there was going to be a homecoming to Mounds very soon. And I'm closing here. I'm getting close. One would turn 65, while the other would turn 52 on Wednesday, July 7th. Bill and Lori, my wife, often celebrated, and still do, their birthdays together. You heard that, still do. This one would be no different. Yet it was very different. A small balloon bouquet, cards that several had already sent, no cake, no candles, but we still had Bill. His regular hospital room was not what any of us were used to on this special day, but it was better than we once, that is only a few days ago, had imagined. Bill's spirits were up, and he was expressing the strong desire to go home. I'm fairly certain that every guest who visited him over the next 3 days heard about how that he was going home. So on Friday, July 9th, my cell phone gave its familiar short buzz indicating a new text message had arrived. The message was from Joe. His text read, "Billy is telling everyone he's going home tomorrow." Great, huh? It was good enough that I just had to call Joe. We talked about Bill's progress, hung up with each other, satisfied that the road to recovery was happening before our very eyes. After the call, I reflected back on my telling Bill that I was hoping he might be able to go home sometime the following week. I did not want to give him any false hope. There was no such thing as false hope. Extremely unlikely outcomes are what God specializes in. I am so glad to have witnessed the team of physicians along with their hospitalist team. 4 physicians hover over Bill earlier in the week and say, "Well, Mr. Chilcote, it looks like you're going to live. We're not sure about you. We weren't sure about you for a while." So just as I predicted, the following week came along. I got that part right, but without Bill in one of the regular rooms at the hospital. That was one of those times, rare in my own dreams, that I was glad to be wrong. Bill did, in fact, go home on Saturday evening, July 10, 2010. That miraculous day could not come soon enough for any of us, and especially for Bill. Bill's buddy, arrived early on Saturday, expecting to change the backless hospital gown for real clothes. That happened. The shuffle out the door like a fast food order in slow motion, like it did not ever happen. Morning turned into midday, and Mounds boys suffered through the patient waiting game typical of most hospital discharges. But somewhere around 6 p.m., Bill phoned to tell me they were finally heading south on Highway 75 towards Mounds, Oklahoma. A birthday cake and candles would be better enjoyed at a later date, and we did. It was a belated birthday, but it was a real treat. I had already told Bill prior to his Saturday discharge that I would have a busy Sunday at Hope Church. An afternoon singing had been scheduled, and my part was to MC and sing. My plan was to catch up on how he was feeling later that evening once the activities were finished. Our afternoon singing had started, and we were already one or two deep into the lineup that was prepared for that day. After introducing Bob, a former member of the Ambassadors, who is also in Glory Land, waiting for you and me, I found a convenient seat on stage. The crowd was not particularly overflowing that day, so the two people entering from the back and along the side were easily noticed. As they selected their seats, the microphone I was holding, along with my jaw, about fell to the floor. Exactly 1 week to the day Bill Chilcote had been confined to a hospital bed in ICU, he's sitting next to Linda McNabb, who had brought him from Mounds. No pumps, no tubes, just a much slimmer body with a broader smile that showed undeniable gratitude beyond words. God spared me at that moment. Had I been actually singing when Bill and Linda entered the church that day, all the years of composure, stage presence, it would have been totally undone instantly. I managed to hold it together following Bob's song and gave a brief, "This is a miracle, there is a miracle among us," acknowledging before continuing on with the singing. I took the microphone to Bill, and he shared his appreciation for all the prayers on his behalf. The only word I could muster right then and there was, wow. And it fits now as well as it did then. Wow. The desired level, according to the medical authorities, at least for Bill, is between 0.50 to 1.50. Is a fairly reliable indicator of how the kidneys are functioning. Bill found out on Monday, July 12th, that his 5.29 measurement on creatine was not where it needed to be. Although it had improved since ICU days, there was still a major concern. The dialysis subject was looming over Bill, and it was clear that this was not a path he wanted to travel. Who does? The weekly schedule of tests would reveal the outcome and a decision. We could still pray, and we did. The following week, Bill tested at 4.35, which was still a ways off from the desired level, but it was improvement, and we credit it to answered prayer. In between that follow-up doctor visits, finger poking, at least it wasn't every hour, resting in his own bed and recliner, Bill received a history lesson shared with various friends on what had taken place over the 4 weeks or so. For Bill, some of the parts were sketchy and others were unknown due to the state of unconsciousness and awakening process typical with his condition. More and more people were coming forward to share their stories. Emails described how their entire churches had assembled to pray for Bill. Phone calls confirmed the widespread effect that Bill's sudden turn of events had made with friends and even unfamiliar people. A double shot of espresso is good, but a double surprise, it can be even better. The presentation for Team Alaska 2010 was to take place on Sunday, August the 1st. This allowed me more time to complete a video. It also allowed time to stage double surprise. Unbeknownst to Bill, the mission team members had videotaped special messages that would be a part of the Alaska trip compilation DVD. On the other hand, the team members had no idea that I had set Bill up to preview their messages before the presentation service. I got a double whammy in there. They would have no way of knowing Bill was videotaping a special message of his own to be included in that DVD presentation to be shared with them. The presentation service was a blessing. Lost Creek United Methodist witnessed the prayer shawl, the anointed words given individually, and much more. It was a full day, but evidently there was no negative impact on Bill's creatinine levels. The following day, Bill's test revealed a level of 3.94, the lowest yet, and still no dialysis. So does God still heal today, my friends? My short answer is yes. I'm not referring to some spectator sport of illusion or fanatical methodology that positions God ready to jump at our beckoning call. I believe in the giftings of the Holy Spirit. I believe in miracles like this one that this is dedicated to. I do not believe there are professional healers that carry this supernatural power in their portfolio to be used at will. But I am convinced that God still uses people to carry out his precious promises. And his word will accomplish what he intends, no matter if it's being given through me or you or somebody else. None of us have a monopoly on healing or any of the gifts. The safest perspective for me is that I figure if God can use a donkey, then he can use me. The opposite is true as well. Remember the healing of the lame man at the temple gate called Beautiful in Acts, the 3rd chapter? Peter and John must have gone up to the temple by the same route and possibly the same hour on many other occasions, but it was only on this one occasion that the Holy Spirit prompted them to perform that particular healing. It was a wonderful example of the use of a sign after which evangelism would follow. It does not, however, set up a template that we mimic in order to achieve the exact same results. Excuse my emotions. In my opinion, this is where we make mistakes. If you read the Bible at all, you will understand how God moves in various ways, his wonders to perform, and seldom do those ways ever make sense to any of us. Thus, the whole concept of faith, trust, understanding who actually sits on the throne and who does not sit there. And it's not me where he sits. I'm seated with him. Additionally, there is the event when deliverance of the slave girl, remember, possessed with the spirit of divination. That's all the way over to Acts, the 16th chapter. She most likely aggravated Paul for many days. He probably ignored her, but suddenly the spirit of divination was discerned by the spirit of discernment. And one moment, on one particular day, all of a sudden, Paul wheeled around and commanded the demon to come out. Maybe he'd had enough, or maybe it was more that this was the time chosen by the Holy Spirit for Paul to be empowered to deliver. So my intent here in closing is to encourage you, not to dishearten anyone who may still be praying and waiting, maybe in a hospital room, for that miracle. We do not understand the workings of God. His way, his thoughts are all so much higher than ours, but we must understand this. He loves us. He loves you. I've seen God work in my own life. I've seen him work in the lives of others, just like Bill. I've also seen wonderful people struggle, waiting on their breakthrough. But please, please, don't give up on God. And remember, perhaps the greatest healing and truest healing of all comes in the form of salvation, the forgiveness of sins. So I end with this. Miracles are to be shared. Thank you for letting me brag on God. I love you. God loves you. God bless.